Hello, everyone. I believe this is our seventh session on neurodivergent learning, and as always, I like to make an effort to introduce motivation behind these sessions. Even though for those of you who want the best elaboration on the motivation behind these sessions, definitely check out the second session, which is the first actual uploaded session of uh, the video series on neurodivergent learning. So, as somebody who struggles with high functioning autism, I've had a hard time interacting with public and higher education, curriculum structured environments, and just even going straight through textbooks, like be it math books, like these academic oriented readings and what have you, that have all these step by step rigid rigor formulations of concepts and all this stuff that a lot of people tend to have strategies imbued onto them in the neurotypical manner. They're able to memorize and understand this stuff, and but for people like myself, I struggled in these environments that worked for other people that it tailored well to, these exam testing oriented environments, which I would say there's still setbacks on how on what these environments reinforce, which is more memorization driven than actually understanding the concepts and the content being presented to you. So I think the upside on people like us who aren't well motivated even relate to these curriculum structured public and higher education system oriented environments, because like myself, I didn't do well in school, and it turns out that I was more task, like project assignment based oriented person, like even in college courses that I was taking where there was more assignment oriented focus, I did quite well in that environment. It was really like the exam driven environments, and this focus on rigor and procedures, like very intricate sequential oriented thinking. That's where I struggled a lot. But anyway, a lot of people, not even just people who have high functioning autism, even people with attention deficit disorder and ADHD, even people that struggle with learning comprehension in certain ways, be it synesthesia or dyslexia. So I try not to generalize what this content is tailored to, what specific individuals are going to get the most out of this. And I would even say, even people who are neurotypical, people who don't struggle developmentally or in these learning oriented environments, that the more what I like to call standardized learning environments, these public and higher education curriculum structured environments, standardized learning environments. Um, I think people who even do well in those environments, I think there's a lot you can get out of some of the strategies that I go over in these sessions. So whether some of the earlier content that I talked about, for instance, dealing with kinesthetic learning, like hands-on interaction with engagement focus with our environment, and what we're trying to focus our attention to, and how we leverage that attention and what we accomplish over time. So we go over a number of things. The previous session, leading into this session, I went over. We did. Well, before that session, I went over active learning and passive learning, and I don't think we didn't really get into what I was going to talk about, being which I will get into a bit today, compound learning. But I want to, I think there's in regards to active learning, passive learning, and consumption learning, I think there's just a lot of abstraction that maybe I missed on, some talking points that I missed on, and I just want to kind of uh, go back a little bit and review active learning, passive learning, consumption learning, and we can then jump from there into compound learning and try and give some examples. But the previous session we went over burnout, and I think what was important that I got out of that discussion is that we want to focus on this load balancing. You know, we can't be 24/7 focused on a task. We have to load balance how we deal with circumstances, our life, like basic needs and all that stuff is important. And even talking about the most simple things that everybody's tired of hearing about, like dieting, and sleep and all that cheesy stuff we can get into. It could be important in terms of how it impacts our ability to orient ourselves to tasks and responsibilities, and how we carry ourselves throughout our day to day. So it's important to be mindful of not just focusing on the different strategies where we can optimize our focus on tasks and how we just engage with with stuff. It's important to which involves sometimes kind of taking a step back, reflect sort of thing. We got to be mindful of how we're attending to things, because there is this thing called metabolism, right? And metabolism, which has an impact on this load balancing, which I like to call cognitive load, right? So like the amount of attention and like how we prioritize our time, it involves this facilitation of cognitive load, or this effort of how our brain is metabolizing. Our brain and body are metabolizing resources to facilitate the effort that we push ourselves to accomplish in each moment. So like I'm not going to get into the dynamics of that, but I wanted to kind of well, we could get into the dynamics of that, but I want to sort of present from the surface or the complexity that arises from like having a means to load balance your life in a sense, which is important. It's not just about, okay, I need to figure out a strategy that's going to get me through the day or get me through this task and this task, or how I'm going to communicate with this person as opposed to these individuals, or just ways like to strategize how we orient ourselves, because we can stress ourselves out and lose sleep, like stressing over, oh, like this, like how should I do this, or like maybe I should do this, and there's we should be honest with and part of it is being honest with ourselves, and coming to terms with like, okay, like how much can I really do, like what can I really do, like how much can I accomplish in a certain amount of time, what should I focus on, what should I hold myself accountable for. Like this all has to do with the load balancing. And maybe I didn't get into all these intricate details the last video, but I figured it'd be important to kind of review that before getting into the active, passive, and consumption learning bits. Now, with regard to active learning and passive learning, um, and leading into consumption learning, there's an interesting dynamic at play here. When we think of passive learning, uh, we can think of something that's not really, like we're focusing our effort on something that is sort of new, is like sort of neutral. It doesn't really penalize us for focusing our efforts on for instance, let's say scrolling through our social media feed for, maybe barely even a minute. Like I get up in the morning, I go through my feed, and maybe it's my Twitter feed, and I over engineered my Twitter feed to feed me a whole bunch of scientific articles. So and a lot of those articles, they could be good, they could be hit or miss, or maybe they're not relevant to what I'm working on right now, and they could be helpful in the future. So it's like, some of the content that I get and I peek at, like, sometimes it might be helpful, other times it might not be. And it's like, yeah, it's taking up some of my attention over some duration of time, but at the same time, it's not really penalizing me in the moment, and I have no reason to try and over rationalize how I'm going to be penalized in the future by going through my Twitter feed where I could find some valuable information, but there's no like there's no structured goal orientation around this. Just going through my feed, it's just okay. Just in the sheer moment of time, I decide I'm going to go through my Twitter feed for maybe a minute or a couple minutes. So that's an example of passive learning. Like it's not really goal structured, so there's nothing to really expect that I'm going to get out of this. There's no real trade-offs to expect. I mean, I might find a really nice article that could be really helpful to the work I'm doing, or I might find a connection, and I send them a message over Twitter. Like all kinds of possibilities can happen, but I don't really expect to be penalized for my focused effort of just spending a couple minutes just to go through this experience, right? And maybe I just decide to do okay, maybe once in a while, so maybe once every couple months, maybe once a week or so, right? So this passive learning oriented effort, in a sense, in this manner, it's it's passive in the sense that on the one hand, it's not structured. There's no goals or ways of me to develop expectations that can leverage fitness payoffs and what have you. There's none of that, and obviously there's no consequences to over rationalize for. On the other hand, of course, this is where when I'm gonna this is why I'm gonna make some talking points on consumption learning after I talk about active learning. I could be consuming time but not get penalized for it. So in a sense, passive learning is a form of consumption learning, but it's not. It's neutral. Um, but there's also the penalizing form of consumption learning where I'm just recklessly focusing my attention on some effort and it penalizes me, whether or not I intentionally know I'm going to get penalized, or in the future I just get penalized for it. So I guess you could say as opposed to active learning, consumption learning, uh, as opposed to consumption learning, active learning rather, is there's goal structure. I use this building a sailboat example, where for instance, like, let's say I'm going fishing or I plan on going fishing, but I decide I want to learn how to build a sailboat. So I watch a bunch of videos on how to build a sailboat. And then I get the materials and then I build the sailboat and I go fishing, right? So like that's a whole active learning oriented process. Um I guess what you could say would be consumption learning is like, and this is in the past, well, if there was penalties for me just going through the whole process of learning how to build the sailboat and never actually following through, and and I get into the details contextually about, okay, well, I didn't prioritize this task or that task or that task because I blocked out all this time going through learning how to build the sailboat, watching videos, reading books, what have you, taking notes, all that stuff on learning how to build the sailboat, but never actually following through. Like, if that somehow impacted other aspects of how I load balance my attention and how I accomplish things, then it's going to be it's going to penalize my fitness in that sense of being negative, impacting consumption learning, where I wasted time and then I was penalized. Like something bad happened, or some sequence, or unrelated sequences of events happened that impacted my life because I wasted all this time learning how to build the sailboat. Or we could think of other examples, like uh, you know people that gamble, like gambling money, um, on it could be a uh, skill related aspect of gambling, right? Like maybe it's chess, maybe it's some other game, right? It could be, and there's motivation behind the gambling where you're putting effort in learning how to gamify your gamble, like thinking about, okay, how can you pick up cues on what other players, what they have, what their hand is, or what have you, like, like trying to read other players and make decisions, right? And then that works against you, right? All that works against you. You lose all this money and whatnot, and you focused all this time on learning how to gamble and all that stuff. And I'm sorry if I'm over stereotyping that, but or let's say, like, you're a gamer and you don't prioritize your time effectively playing video games, right? And it impacts other aspects of your life. Like, let's say you're going to school and you're not doing well in school because you're spending too much time playing the games and not focusing on completing homework assignments and studying for tests and what have you, right? So these are all examples of relating active learning, passive learning, and consumption learning to each other. The active learning aspect being the positive, the passive learning being the neutral, but the consumption learning can be passive learning oriented, or it can be maladaptive. And then compound learning is, let's say, I incorporate strategies and how I engage with information. So let's say, for instance, I have this art piece here at my desk, and so so I've been working on this art piece, and the motivation behind working on these art pieces is, like, I go through papers, articles, and textbooks, like math books and stuff like that, and I struggle with, like, engaging with the exercise problems and the rigor behind the equations and how they're presented and all that. And one of my strategies is, as I'm going through the book, I facilitate ways to engage with the abstraction of the material in a multiple modality of ways rather than one way. So the compoundness is like this modality, multi-mode aspect of engaging with content and different types of content that can combine uh, a perspective into each other. Like, let's say, like, okay, I study chemistry and I study biology because I have motivations to understand biochemical interaction. biological, chemical oriented related interactions. So compound learning becomes more abstract rather than strategically uh, trying to use different ways of engaging with our environment and what we're trying to leverage circumstantially. Um, the abstraction and potential of this expands into different domains of understanding as well, and how they piggyback off of each other. But anyway, I think now's a great time to get into dialogue. I think I covered a good bit of content. So yeah, let's start a dialogue. What are your thoughts?
Uh, I don't know. Learning, learning is, it used to be really complicated for me, but it's like a skill, the more time you spend learning things, the easier it gets. And, you know, I, you know, like elementary school and middle school and high school, I feel like you're more like geared to learn because you're younger, but you're less skilled at learning. So it's more difficult, right? So I don't know. I spent a lot of time like reading like informational stuff. Like my a big portion of my YouTube feed is like programming oriented or science oriented.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, do you think that there is an inverse relation to how we learn when we're younger as opposed to when we get
Neurochemistry,
older?
I know some.
Yeah, you cut off a bit there, but I was gonna ask, um, do you believe there's an inverse relation between how we learn when we're younger as opposed to when we get older? Because you said when we're younger, we're less skilled, but we're
Yeah,
more
but we're
geared towards
we're
learning,
more
as opposed.
biologically we're we're when we're younger, we're more like a sponge, right? For
Mhm.
cleaning. But when we get older, we're more like a Brillo pad, if that makes sense.
So the sponge evolves into a Brillo
Like,
pad in terms of how the way
yeah,
that the synapses of the neurons that are facilitating the learning
yeah,
and like the pruning dynamics. Um, okay, I see. That's interesting.
yeah. Like the Brillo pad's not gonna hold as much water, but it's also going to be more efficient at cleaning. So, while the sponge does work,
Well, I think
um,
there's like ups
it
and
may not
downs
work
of
for like
both.
harder topics, like more gritty topics, or like, caked on dirt with a dish, right? Like like something like neuroscience, that would be more like a caked on topic, whereas like basic mathematics would be like, oh, I just ate some greasy food, I just need some soap and water and a sponge.
Yeah.
So we're more capable of learning anything when we're younger, but we're better at learning when we're older.
Okay. well, I mean, we're more capable of broadening our depth of knowledge as we're younger, as opposed to older. We focus more on specialization in the ways we
Yeah.
strategize the utilization of knowledge, as opposed to
Yeah.
acquiring knowledge. Like we develop aspects to filter that. We develop cognitive mechanisms over time to filter those out as we get older. Well, of course, that's what
Yeah,
comes with the
like
pruning
a
dynamic.
kid will like take any information and that will become concreted, whereas useless information, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
more easily, I think.
I'm not sure what
I think
Kevin
your
or
like
Taylor
the
has to
Twitter
say about
metaphor
that.
is
I had a brain thought. So, I have ADHD and autism amongst other neurospicy problems. Or I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't say problems, they're just challenges. But when I was younger, I was learning Latin and by 8th grade, but I was, speaking French in 3rd grade. Um I was able to look at a picture and draw it. I found that these skills diminished with because I grew up in an unhealthy, unsafe environment. The longer I was in the unsafe and unhealthy environment, the less capacity I had to not only practice my skills but hold on to my skills. And I think that had such a detrimental effect on not only my view of education, because I felt, trying to get perfect grades and, trying to, look for that, that it's that nurture nature type of thing that goes on in child development, where it's like, sometimes it can be genetics, but also it can be your environment. And I can say genetically, most of the biological siblings I have are very intelligent. But looking at each of our individual paths in life as we've turned into adults, depending on if we were in a healthy environment, because most of us were adopted, so that's another key factor. Um, Depending on our households, I mean, it's a rainbow of turnouts. And I know for me, like I tried to go to college straight out of high school after being in such multiple detrimental, abusive, non-conducive to learning environments. I
Mm-hmm.
completely failed out that first semester. But now that I've had time to reset my nervous system over the past 3 years, I've gone into school, I've gotten straight A's. I do find myself having to almost having that internal argument if we have to sit here and do the task because you're paying for this and it's expensive, so do the thing. um
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like based from child development, I feel like our development in childhood directly correlates to how we respond to education as adults and how we grasp those skills. Because with my
Mm-hmm.
ADHD, I get that hunger for knowledge. With autism, I have the hyper focus. But in between the two, if there's no self discipline, if there's not a balance to how I'm consuming it and using it, I feel like it just crashes and burns. And I feel that burnout and that self loathing cycle start over if I don't keep the scales perfectly aligned, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's good to like try and develop a niche that gives you versatility and that you can sort of that there's things that you'll stick to that capture a lot of your attention, like through most of your thought process. Like if you can focus on those things and you have a large motivated interest to do so, then I think like that's the best. Like that's what's really going to help you really develop the right mindset.
100%. And I find that and for me, it comes down to faith. If I pray before I sit down and do school, I find myself feeling more motivated because there's a lot of things that I'm motivated for. It's just keeping that consistent. This is important to you. You do enjoy this. You might just be having an off mental health day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lex, you mentioned about there were some points you wanted to make about the Twitter example I gave.
Oh yeah. So I mean, Twitter is a great example for like the like you're like, oh, I can't really uh like moderate how much time I spend on Twitter, and it's because it's exactly what neurodivergent people want. It's constant new information, right? And which makes it very difficult to like moderate.
Yeah.
Um and but at the same time, if your like feed is like, going back to what I was saying, if you have both useful and useless information in your feed, um you you will I feel like you'll like ignore the useless stuff if you're using it for trying to get information and really embrace
Hmm.
the stuff that is useful.
Okay.
Um, and I know that you have fine-tuned your Twitter so that it's as useful as possible.
Yeah.
Um, whereas I am on the opposite side of that, so I'm literally just burning time and doing nothing. Whereas you can hop on Twitter and like find new scientific papers to help your research and stuff.
I
Um,
can literally be drowned by the amount
now that being
of information that like I'm starting to
said,
feel that way with YouTube podcasts
I
content
also
now.
have so, I know,
There's like so much content out there. It's like,
trust me.
and then
Uh,
like
but yeah,
can you imagine the people that were like, we really wanted the internet, and like how many of them now are like, wait, like you misunderstood. I didn't want the internet. I just wasn't getting enough of the internet. But it's like, but you said you wanted the internet, and now you have it.
yeah,
It's
it's like,
and then people are freaking out because they have all of the internet. It's like, yeah, it's what it feels like now. Oh man. It's like everything that was harder to find was on 4chan, and now it's everywhere.
hey, something came up. I have to go.
Sure, yeah. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, send me a link for the next one. I'll definitely be here.
Thank you. Thank you. Take it easy.
See you,
Um,
Jesse. See you,
yes.
Taylor. See you, Kevin.
Yeah, I got any more remarks to build off of that?
Uh-uh.
I was thinking that I don't know how to use social media properly because I don't know, I'm not able to make friends on it. Discord is better for me to make friends with, but that's more of a chat room. Like, how would I make friends on Facebook?
Hmm.
Have back and forth conversation, find people my age. Um, I feel like Facebook, it more feels like YouTube, honestly. You go there, you consume content. Like, well, okay, but where are the friends? Okay, I guess it's not a good place to meet friends. So it's confusing to me.
Um, I know that when I first got Facebook, you can go, like, you just search up a topic that you like. I know one of the groups I'm in is like autistic comedy. It's a little more on the darker side, but I've met some people that I chat, here and there with, um, which is nice. So if you maybe find common topics that could be helpful to you trying to find, peers within your, age group that, you have things in common with.
Yeah, it's strange because the internet seems dominated by kids. Like, where are the people my age? It's like everyone it seems like most people who go to these websites, they have a campus. They're in school, or college, they have a campus to go to. And I never use the internet for social purposes back when I was at UC Davis as an undergrad. I had a campus. I had plenty of other people my age, close to my age, and I would use the internet to look up clubs or, but not like to meet people. I'd use it to look up clubs, and I'd use Facebook as a Rolodex, just a place to store contacts. Might as well have been a cellulose Rolodex. We're passing out business cards. It was just slightly more convenient than that. But I didn't use it as a place to find friends, to look up, people to meet and so on. But now that I'm older, I don't have a campus full of people my age to go to. I'm the same age as Jesse, actually.
Mhm.
And I don't have such a campus. And I feel like I need the internet for social purposes now,
Oh yeah.
far more than I did in the past. In the past,
Oh yeah.
why you're right there next to a campus. Well, not everyone is, but a lot of people are. You have courses, you're being kind of forced to be in the same place with people your age, interact with people your age.
I think it's because a lot
It's
of
like a
people.
perfect social environment. But now, so it seems backwards. Like, what I'm doing, going on the internet more now, seems like the opposite of what most people who go on
Mhm.
social parts of the internet do. I mean, I always use the internet for information, but like
Yeah.
for social, and it doesn't make it's one of those things that seems natural to me, but is such a small minority of it
Okay.
feels like is a small minority of people, although it's definitely out there. A lot of things that seem natural, like driving. Driving's stressful. Why? Because it's dangerous. It feels dangerous. It I There's statistics that show it's dangerous. It demands much more constant attention than walking through a city or um,
Yeah.
public transit, where you have to be aware to an extent, but not constantly, not where every moment something could go wrong in the
Yeah.
same way.
Yeah. That's what I worry about with
And
driving.
so something that's so sensible for me, just like counterintuitive to how a lot of humans think of driving as this relaxing thing. It just doesn't make any sense, yet that's the majority. That's why so many people like it, and why so many people spend thousands of dollars every year to do it. A car can be ten, car can be 10,000 a year,
Yeah.
even without a high-end luxury car. You add up all the expenses. Think of all the expenses, the gas, the parking. What if the windows are smashed because someone broke into it to
Yeah.
pay that, or just other repairs, insurance, you know,
Mhm.
the cost of the car itself. You have to buy a new car every so often, or you can buy a used car, but you have to buy another car every so often because they eventually break down and become pieces of junk. And if you add all that up, it can approach 10,000 a year. That's a lot of money. So it shows how something that's so obviously just such an obviously thing that I really dislike, and then having all these people who like it, but it feels like I dislike it for very good reason. And
Mhm.
yet it's not how most people think. And there's several of those. There's several of those. It seems obvious that most people would want this, and most people don't want this. So yeah, that just happens to me a lot. I wonder if either of you feel that way about your interests or ideas.
Well, I think that in terms of like the fact that the people that I relate to are not in the demographic area I'm in, like it's a challenge for me. So I constantly need to be using the internet if I'm having any kind of communication with anybody doing anything related to what I'm doing. So that's definitely a big deal for me, I would say.
I just like socializing when I want to, and then when I don't want to, I don't want to be perceived.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the internet makes that easy. You could just go off when you don't want to. There are people who socialize all day. I would not want that. I want a balance, but it's hard to even get
Mhm.
a little bit if you really are looking for people with shared interest. For example, I do something in computer programming that's kind of unusual. And it's one of those things that seems natural to me. It seems natural that most programmers want to do it, but it's actually not something that most programmers, in fact, want to do. And that's discussing my side projects. Having these ideas, physics simulation, other things,
Mhm.
and talking about it. It sounds like a natural thing. If you're in programming, you can come up with projects of your own, and that's the fun. You have all this freedom to do these projects, and you can fit them in alongside work and school. Even if work is also programming, it's different enough in nature from my side projects that it's going to not really interfere. It's not going to feel like more work. Like when you get good at programming, it's not just one amorphous blob of tasks. It becomes so different. Than subtasks within that field become very different. And if you so you can like have a programming job, but then you do your home programming, but your home programming is feels very different because you're solving very different sets of problems and so on. It's like a language. If you're just learning a foreign language, it feels like everything you do in a language is kind of the same neural pathways because you're just trying to learn a language. But once you learn the language and get fluent, then different kinds of actions that use that language feel more and more different because
Mhm.
because the language itself is not the hurdle. The hurdles are what you're doing with language. That makes sense. So regardless, I've always had side projects since high school, with programming. And it's something most programmers don't want to do. If I look at the Python Discord, again, it's dominated by kids, which is not something I needed back when I was young. I had no need for
Mhm.
online chat room. I used forums extremely rarely when I was young. Once in a while, but just it was not common. Because I didn't need to. I had in-person stuff. I had a campus. Regardless, saying that aside, most people also are like, there's people looking for help. There's people who just want to talk about non-programming, which is okay, but I'm also looking for discussions about programming, side projects, and ideas and so on. And there's just not a whole lot of what I'm looking for in terms of here's an idea, let's talk about it. And then conversely, let me listen to what your idea is. And Jesse is very much that way, as am I, but Jesse's not in programming.
Mhm.
So finding someone else in programming, my kind of technically strong area, that has proven difficult.
So for me, I'm not good at building systems or fixing systems with code, but Like I understand theory behind computing and coding, and it's just hard for me to like in terms of thinking like an engineer using code, but like as someone who's trying to understand how to predict behavior and doing modeling, I feel like coding, at least what I was able to get out of coding, and mind you, I went to college for computer science, and so I did make an effort learning how to code and using code to the extent I can, but it's for me, I could come up with high level functions and characteristics of a system, but in terms of implementing the dynamics of the system and building and fixing systems with code, like that's just not my. I just that's not where my competencies are. I mean, I feel like I could uh, complement the work that people that are programmers are doing. It's just that I'm not a programmer. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, like if you gave more specific examples, I could test them with Python scripts or something,
Yeah,
stuff
like
like that.
machine learning, like
Or if you
regression,
found a
like
Python script that
statistical
if you found a
uses of
Python script
using
that wasn't
code.
quite what you wanted, and then you said, "Oh, Kevin, what, you know,
Exactly.
it doesn't do this. I needed to do this." I could probably, I could spare a little time to
Okay,
help
I
out
see.
on stuff like that. But you have to be specific with what you want the script to do. Because I don't have a
Yeah,
solid understanding of what you're doing.
yeah.
There are not that many examples, so
Hmm.
I'd have to see some more concrete stuff to start to realize what it was.
You know what? I sent some stuff to one of my collaborators. I can send to you some GitHub repositories that might be useful for you to check out. But I can send that to you later. I guess I'm not sure if Taylor was going to mention anything.
Oh, I feel like when it comes to like developing social connections, um, sometimes it's just doing the mundane, whether you're like walking to the corner store or taking the bus, because I also do not enjoy driving. Very stressful. Um, you know, I met Lex in a Dollar General out in the wild, all organic. Sometimes when you're just out in the wild, you can meet people in the wild and be friends. Sometimes it just works out that way. So sometimes I don't think necessarily social media can always be the bridge we need, but I think it can be a useful tool sometimes. But also there are far too many children on the internet.
Maybe it's part of the cybernetic wilderness. It's like a different kind of wilderness. The social media. I would say it's the cybernetic part of the cybernetic wilderness.
That's a good point of view.
What was Jesse saying?
I was saying that this concept called the cyber wilderness, the cybernetic wilderness, where like you can sometimes meet people on social media, for instance, right? Social media is like the cybernetic or part of an example of the cybernetic wilderness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like there's an online wilderness and in-person wilderness. I just think it's a matter of finding the right online circle. I have this term, expert-friendly communities. And it's a community that's friendly to experts. It means that if you have more experience, I have quite a bit of experience in programming, then then you have other people to talk to about expert level problems, such as what's a good way to organize this code, or what library do I use? Those decisions are not trivial, because they're not like, how can I write an if statement that does this and this, or orders of operations, or those are things you're just learning. And same with writing. It's like, if you're trying to write novels, if I'm trying to learn how to write good novels, I'm not going to hang out with people who are learning English. Oh, but they're both English, right? In English class, I took English class. Well, no, it's not learning English. It's not, well, there was some vocab and grammar, but it's mainly writing. It's not like you're not just spending your time trying to learn the nuts and bolts of a language. So yeah, it is. I do wonder where the millennials go on the internet. I mean, they must be somewhere. People of all ages use the internet. I feel that children have imaginary friends and adults have imaginary friendships, meaning that a lot of the people who are millennials and older are
Renee Barclay,
developing these fake relationships with personalities, YouTubers, and so on, and like streamers and YouTubers and all the other, and bloggers and so on, but they don't like get to know the person's sense of a back and forth interaction with the person. And so I think this happens to a lot of people, millennials and older. A lot of younger people, they go on the internet and they chat with, and if I was that age, well, I would have a campus, and if I didn't, it would just be this whole extra venue, but I just didn't need it. Campus is just it's in person without the downsides of in person, without having to travel a long distance, without having to, break the ice with, how do you meet someone on a bus or cafe, on BART? How do you talk to people on a BART train? This is not something that's expected to do. It's like, it's viewed as very weird to do that. Well, the answer is you have to go to events instead. Like, you have to go to a meetup. Then you're expected, like a hiking group. That's something you cannot do online. I expected to meet up, but now you have to travel. It's an hour journey, or like an hour by car, 90 minutes by BART each way is like typical, and both of those options are not ideal. Car especially, it just sounds like hour of pure stress and expense, and hurting the environment each direction. Sorry, no, I don't want that. At least BART, I can have, get a low-end computer that no one's going to steal, and then do programming on if I really want to, but it's still an inconvenience. It's something I didn't have to worry about college. But yeah, there must be some place, but a lot of people my age will develop these really strong relationships with people who don't know them back, who don't reciprocate, who don't know they exist even. And I think that's kind of taking away from the need, the immediate need, the instinctive need to, it's a fake fulfillment of an instinct to socialize, right? So instead of the instinct driving us in the right direction, which is to maintain a social group, it's something that drives people in kind of an incorrect direction, as is often the case in the modern world. Out-of-date instincts. Because you can feel so connected to someone who does not know you exist. And in my book, if someone does not know you exist,
Yeah,
and you feel connected to them, then it's an imaginary friendship, because it's a friendship because you feel a deep sense of connection. But if they don't know you exist, it cannot be a real friendship.
Yeah,
Now, online can be
dynamics.
real.
Yeah.
They don't have to necessarily know your name online for it to be a real friendship. As long as they're not an AI, a quantum AI counts. But we don't have quantum AI yet. We don't have quantum computers that are meaningfully complex yet. But anyway, yeah. So I guess I don't know the best strategy of online in person. I'll probably do a lot. I'll probably try to do one in-person thing twice a week. But it is a significant amount of traveling. Something, it was when I had a campus, it just was not an issue. I was there. It was a 10-minute walk or 15-minute walk to get somewhere on the campus to interact with people. But
Yeah.
now it's like it's probably door to door is probably on average going to be 90 minutes because you have to get to the bar, wait for the train, go, then walk. And buses don't make that faster. I can jog as fast as these slow buses go.
So
They're
you think
useful for
what
other people, like if you're handicapped or something, but they're not that useful for me.
what do you think like the college campus is still
By now,
like
they're too young for me.
yeah,
Like
probably.
if there were areas that function like campuses where you had either a millennial only or mostly millennial area or a hodgepodge that evenly spreads across a wide range of ages, that would be fine too. But the issue is it gets dominate these in-person things get dominated by kids. I think it's some deep human instinct that one of those deep human instincts I don't seem to have.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, why do we make it so easy for kids to socialize with each other? We put them through school, we put them, for kindergarten to 12th and then 12th to 16th grade, I guess is undergraduate and early grad school masters. We make it so easy. Well, that's good. It should be. We should try to make people such a healthy thing that satisfies an instinct easy. But then why in the adult world do we make it so hard? Oh, now you're expected to drive. That's expensive. Like, are you expecting us all to be rich? That's time consuming. I thought time is supposed to be more valuable in adulthood. I mean, so many people I interact with say they're too busy. Well, then why
Oh
drive? If
yeah.
you're too busy, then hire someone to drive you and do work in the car or take public transit and do work on the train. If you have a ton of work to do and it's computer work, or if you have hobbies you want to do, you could probably do basic wood carving on the train with, small tools and so on if you really want to. But I'm like, it's strange how people like just, but they still have time to drive. They still have time to surf the web. Like I do that too, but I'm cutting it back because that's a waste of time.
And then I guess there's people that don't realize how much time they're spending and then they say, I don't have any time.
My attitude is I only say no, I'd only not have time for a few minutes of social interaction if A, there was a very specific deadline within the hour, or B, there was I really was using my, every minute of my time usefully. Like if I felt I was optimizing and I got to the point where every minute of my time or almost every minute was spent very efficiently on what I wanted to do, and I wasn't like wasting any surfing the web. If I used the web, it was for things I needed to do or a specific hobby that I really wanted to do and so on. But no, I'm not there and hardly anyone is. And that means I always have some time to talk. That doesn't talking to other people here does not break my schedule. What will break it is if I waste too much time doing things I shouldn't do.
Right. Or things
Enough of that
that
though.
it's
I
not that
Yeah, I'm doing both an online and in-person thing, but it's just odd how hard is it to find millennials on the internet.
yeah,
It's like
one
it's so obvious that that's such a it should be such a good place to socialize. I don't have to travel 90 minutes, and I'm in a bustling urban metropolitan area. I'm in the Bay Area. Like it's hard enough here to find in-person things that are convenient to get to. But there's a lot of people who are in smaller towns and so on. It's even harder for them. The internet's no harder. So that sounds like the internet sounds like a really good place to it should by all means be such a great place to meet people. Because you could have, you know, billions of people. You find that 1 in a million very niche interest, you could go. But I think it's just that the algorithms are not built that way. The companies are not incentivized to make the internet good to meet people. They're incentivized to maximize eyeball time. They build the algorithm. It does a very good job there. A simple example is in the old days, when I was an undergrad, the Facebook feed was what your friends posted, reverse chronological. It's that simple. No algorithm, just ordered by time. Kind of the most obvious thing to do, a lot like what forums do, what Discord messages do. Well, that's forward chronological because it's upside down, but you know, same idea. Now it's sorted by the algorithm. It's not in order. You can make it in order, but every single time you click the feed, you have to keep clicking in order, over and over again. Every single time you go back and go forward, it'll lose the order because they really want the algorithm. They don't want it to be in order. They want you. The algorithm helps them. That's why they made the algorithm. And yeah, that makes a big difference, actually. They say that when people switch to reverse chronological, and there's also a lot of stuff that isn't from my friends, just some random stuff. Again, it feels like it's a place to consume random content curated by an algorithm designed to make it addictive. Doesn't seem like a good place to make friends, you know? Or at least I don't know how to use it effectively in that end. Wait, I'm ranting. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
I feel like I can understand your frustration, but because it seems as though, I'm a millennial. I'm at the end of the millennial line. And I find myself, even when I do take part in the cyber world, like the wild of the internets, um, I can find it a little hard because there are a lot of younger generations, or on the completely other end of the spectrum, it's much older people, and you kind of just want to find like your people, and that can be very hard. It seems almost like a lottery kind of situation where if you find that, those couple people where, you really find a strong friend group, it can be frustrating. Because I know even, you know, circling back to like autism, I honestly don't feel like I fit in, even if I do have people I sometimes hang out with. Um, I feel like it doesn't always what's the right word? It's like I don't really fit in with them, so I still kind of feel alienated even though I have people, I guess. And and it's also lately people I've had one person in the friend group say, "Oh, well, when you talk, you're really rude." And I'm like, "Well, I just, generally have a flat affect. It's not that I'm, trying to be offensive." I don't know how people sugarcoat things. I don't have that setting. It was not, my programming does not have that one. So it seems like sometimes that I do have a small group, even then it's like I don't fit into that. And on the internet, sometimes the communication is so sparse or it's so overrun by different age groups that it kind of does feel a little frustrating.
I've never seen a group dominated by older people, an internet group. I've just never encountered one that was dominated by older. the best if they had older people, they just seem to have a wider range. So I don't know if that would be, if it was my field and it was mostly baby boomers, would that be bad? I don't know. I mean, the issue is kids just don't have they don't have the maturity, and that goes up to undergrad, up to, about 22 or 23 for like a deep conversation. And B, they don't have friends. And C, there's this thing where I think there's a small number of people who don't lose a childlike sense of wonder. I am among that. I still feel a lot of things are magical, such as magnetism.
Yeah.
I mean, you could take two magnets, put a solid block of wood between them, and they still somehow know about each other. I mean, that's mystical and wonderful and beautiful. But that's a minority. And if someone's young, then and this happened a bit when I was a child. Like I would have friends younger than me, but then they would eventually age out of my interests. My interests would get more complex versions, like making marble machines. When I was a kid, I made simple marble machines. When I was an older kid, I made more complex marble machines. And that, you know, that it's not like I lost the interest. I just won't make it more complex because you're more mature, you have more capabilities, your mind has grown. But it's like versus the people who just age out of that. Now, in terms of highly restricted focuses, that's been a sign of like autism and so on. It doesn't, there are so many people, the bread and butter of human society is built around 40-hour work weeks, doing a very small range of tasks in many cases. Talk about restricted focus. We wouldn't be able to build society like that if we had people who just had broad interests. We'd have to design jobs differently, give them a wide range of stuff. That's what I like about programming is that if it's a narrow range of tasks, you tell the computer to do those tasks because it's narrow and well defined. So broadly speaking, this can be done. It doesn't always work perfectly, but it works well enough that it's tolerable. So then you can move on to other tasks and you get that natural wide range. It's still not ideal, but it's much better than most jobs, I would say, for me. And yeah, that's another, I think, stumbling block is that people they lose interest in a lot of things, and it's kind of hard to keep conversations going.
I think people mostly lose interest in things they just don't relate to. And in line with not having like intentional motivation towards that relatability. So it's kind of just coincidence. But I mean, I think that even like, that, and maybe I don't know. I think that there's people that don't necessarily have autism, but they're just, I don't want to call them superhuman, but they like have hyper focus capacities as well. And it's not that they necessarily have ADHD. Like there's no research proving that in order to have hyper focus, you have to have these neurological difficulties. Like I don't think that's necessarily the case. You could just have like your fitness could just be that good, you know. It doesn't mean you have autism because you're a scientist that happens to be a physicist or you're a cosmologist or something. It doesn't mean you have autism. I don't think we should stereotype this person that has this level of intelligence like Einstein had autism. Like it's like, okay, like, does your assumption that he had autism, is that in line with like his, whether or not he had a medical diagnosis for that, or, it's like, okay, well, like, you know what I'm saying? Same thing with like Richard Feynman, right? Like another physicist. It's like these people, they're high functioning doesn't mean that they have autism or they have these learning difficulties that we struggle with. It just could be that they just they 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 won the cortical lottery, and even people with autism sometimes can win the cortical lottery because their autism doesn't hold them back as much as maybe others. So uh, I just figure I had those thoughts.
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard to pin down because it's hard to define these
Like that's why I don't like to
things.
call autism a superpower necessarily, because like I think certain attributes of autism aren't necessarily 100% depicted in autism, right?
One thing I complain about not having enough of in society is people are not enough themselves. That was something I really noticed at Hopkins. But honestly, I think it's everywhere, even Davis and so on. I mean, if you the levels in Hopkins were the people in the lab, they would spend so much of their time, the bulk of their day, following step-by-step protocols. And as a programmer, it's like the last thing you do. That's what a computer should do, not a human. And they were trying to make themselves as precise as possible. I'm like, well, shouldn't you have a computer? Now, a lot of that's necessity. You can't just automate things. But a lot of people were just content with that, as opposed to trying their best to, reduce that, trying to utilize undergraduate labor, or, design experiments more carefully. I mean, there are ways to mitigate it, but it's just not that. Or pick projects that have less of that, but maybe are more difficult in other ways. But again, I think this is everywhere. That's one of my complaints. People are not themselves that much. I talk to someone and if I hear opinions, oftentimes I've heard those opinions many times before. And it comes across, they're either saying the sky is blue or they're saying the sky is green, depending on whether I agree with the opinions or not. And there's oftentimes not much depth to those opinions. Like what are those opinions? What are those opinions? What are those? Like I've heard, this just feels like I'm talking to, it just feels kind of like I'm talking to a chat bot that is regurgitating an echo chamber or something. It's very rare that I talk to someone and their ideas cannot be Googled.
Yeah.
Maybe some of the pieces can, but the idea as a whole, I haven't heard it before. That's very rare. And when I was talking about lab automation, I was making it more precise and just, automate things. I was going into the details of, I don't know if I quite got to non-Googleable territory, but I was going into the details of the conditions when it's needed. Like, okay, well, it's only needed if they actually have a large amount of time following protocols. I was being careful because a lot of people in tech love automation just for the fun of it, but you don't need to automate everything in this world. You need to automate the stuff if there's a need. Are they spending many hours doing well-defined protocols? If not, then automation's probably not that good because it's like jazz improv and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So I spend all this time, I was being very careful, and I was saying that the kind of automation we need is one that's very flexible and modular, not just any automation. And I found a couple companies doing that, Emerald and Stratios. But again, it was kind of a rare take on it, because it's not just some vague automation's good. It was like, this is why it's necessary. It's not necessary if these conditions don't hold. This is why it had more depth to it. And I just wish more people, when they express opinions, had similar amounts of depth. It was just rare that I encountered that. Just the depth for whatever opinion is there just isn't much depth. It's more like a slogan or some platitude rather than something well thought out. And I just wish more people were themselves. I want to see the person and their uniqueness. I don't want to see their echo chamber when I talk to them.
So it's like an echo chamber, as in like they're not showing interest or making an effort to understand a thing that they're regurgitating based off some source that they saw about it, or based off what some other person in their circle said about it. But it, like, they're regurgitating into a very minimal amount of detail that they feel is relevant to their understanding, which may or may not be
Yeah, a good example is
literal
on
literate
Facebook.
understanding. Yeah,
If someone talks about a problem that Bart has, people will jump on a bandwagon and say, well, it's dangerous because of crime or whatnot. And that just summarizes just how when someone says that, I'm seeing an echo chamber. I'm not seeing a person. First of all, it's not dangerous, like at least compared to driving.
I see that a lot in the machine learning
And
community.
generally,
No
public
offense.
transit is safer than driving with all the crime and all the problems, which are problems, but driving is why there's from the frying pan to the fire as an expression. It's like, oh yeah, that's why that's an expression. Every time someone complains about public transit being too dangerous, oh yeah, that's why they have from the frying pan to the fire as an English expression. Now it makes sense why they bothered to have that expression now. Because when they're bitching about how dangerous it was, well, then how do they get around? Oh yeah, driving. Million Americans killed in my lifetime with car accidents. That doesn't sound very safe. And it shows the zeitgeist. And when I was a kid, especially, I remember reading something on the news and thinking to myself, it's on the news because it won't happen to me. Stuff that happens to me, like cancer, or I mean, in the future, likely to happen to me, like cancer that's very bad, is not going to be in the news. And I was thinking, like, but this unusual thing, like a plane crash, or like, it's in the news because it won't happen to me. Otherwise, it wouldn't be newsworthy, because the things happening to me are not going to be that rare. Probably not going to be that rare. And it's yeah, I'm seeing an echo chamber.
Yeah.
It's not all well thought out. I've seen it a million times. It's factually incorrect. So it's an example of saying the sky is green, because driving's in almost every situation more dangerous than public transit.
Okay.
I'm seeing the echo chamber. I'm not seeing the person. I'm not seeing someone with an unusual strategy how to say safe on BART with computers, for example, or it's stuff I've heard so many times before. It just feels like it blurs together. And we all do that. We all regurgitate stuff, but the real problem is the lack of being themselves, not the presence of being other people. We all should have our place in time where we just follow protocols because that's an easy way to do something, and it's refined and it gets the job done quickly. But the issue is the lack of going beyond that. having things that we are of to ourselves that we're willing to share with the world, that we're not afraid to share with the world. Doesn't mean we shove it down people's throats. So we should be open to sharing stuff in a time, unless we really don't want to be social. But if we do want to be social, we should be to an extent and so on. That's just frustrating because I wish I could see more people be themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I was saying, I think from one of the communities I see display this kind of behavior is the machine learning community, whether it's people putting out more papers and like papers just seem, for the most part, from my point of view, like forgettable, uninteresting, uninspired, unrelatable, and it's not that I mean, there's certain papers that a lot of papers that seem to focus on replicating experiments, but not really getting into the details that matter or elaborating enough on anything meaningful or relatable to get out of the paper. It seems like a lot of people are just putting those papers out just for the sake of like having that on their portfolio or so showing that they got some work done. It's like, oh yeah, I put out this publication with these results, and it's not like the way they conveyed those results and the essence of the work matter, but the fact that they got it out there, which I think sort of aligns with like them not being themselves and presenting their work in that way, which I would say is unfortunate. Like people not taking the time to consider, like, I'm getting this piece of information out there, I should care about how it's being presented. Although, like, arguably, maybe it's presented well enough to their own circle, but it's not in a way that it can be expressed across fields to have a more broad discussion. It is less meaningful from my perspective. And then the discussion I'm seeing from at least the machine learning street talk community, a lot of people are just regurgitating information and not really having much of a. I don't see much of a inspired discussion, basically. But that's the piggyback off the points that you were making.
It's the same idea. I feel like if I want someone to regurgitate information, ChatGPT is a very nice way to do it. And SQL queries would be even nicer if I somehow could, if they release the API for querying and training data directly with SQL or NoSQL. Like it's great there. But if I want people to be themselves, I'm talking to people. I really want them to be themselves and not the world around them. Because I want to interact with the person. I don't want to interact with the world around the person.
It's like you have to invert your behavior or behave in a way that inverts your approach to communicating, where you're not the active you engaging with the platform you're using isn't the inversion, but like after you engage, after your engagement per se, like it's an inverted function, it's an inverted action that corresponds to like the platform you're using and how you're engaging with anybody else directly or indirectly on the platform.
I wonder if
Yeah,
Taylor has more success with getting people to be themselves. Because it could just be a simple thing as like a comfort zone or being nervous. You know, it's there, but they're hiding it.
I feel like with like people I'm friends with, most of them are neurodivergent, and we like I know with one friend I have, you know, they can start out kind of with their mask up. Sometimes I do too, and it's just like the longer you sit there and just talk and just let yourself, sometimes it's just venting the day and then you kind of just fall into yourself. Like um I've spent most of my life masking. I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but now that I'm older, oh yeah,
oh yeah,
I don't have the energy to wear a mask. I'm tired. So I feel like if
or it's
you
just you just feel so overwhelmed with everything you're doing that having a mask on top of that dynamic is just too much.
exactly my
That's
thoughts.
where I'm at. It's
Yeah,
like
I don't yeah,
yeah,
school and health stuff and life. I just do
yeah.
not have the strength to sit there and be like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna wear a mask today." No, I'm not. I don't have the spoons to do so. But honestly, I feel like it's kind of a lead by example thing. You know, we're not everybody's cup of tea, but that can sometimes feel um kind of hard or frustrating when you feel like you're not connecting with as many people. But when you do connect with the right people, your weird isn't really weird. It's just you.
Mhm.
Since we're not like old people, I wonder if a lot of the less energy is more psychological.
Hmm.
Meaning, when you have a campus of people and there's this general vibe of optimism, and you have these activities right there, easy to get to, it just it's so much easier to motivate yourself. But when you're alone and the algorithms are much better developed today, it's stealing time than they were in the past. And there isn't really a campus, aren't groups. You lose so much structure. I feel like school was about the right amount of structure, having structured part of the day and an unstructured part of the day. But you lose so much of it that maybe can be kind of harder. And also another thing is, this happened to me with my programming. My side projects are a lot more complex than they were in undergrad. Because I set my sights higher, I have more skills, but that means they take longer. So something that I'd enjoy to do in undergrad, like make a Blender game that just does some simple thing, just feels too trivial now. And it can be hard to be motivated because it means it takes a lot longer to get to my destination because I'm trying to do a lot more with the side project. So I think that's I don't think we're like aging yet. I don't think we're like older in a meaningful way, in a degraded bodily function way, except maybe at the very athletic levels, very tip-top performance. I don't think any meaningful way. In my opinion, I think it's really psychological. And addressing that, in my opinion, can restore the youth to us until 60. Brains can stay youthful until 60 easily, and maybe even later than that. That's my opinion. We won't be able to run quite as fast when we're that old, but we can still jog and other things.
Yeah, just to add on to that, like I made a number of talking points earlier and even in the previous video, which I'll have the session up soon along with this video. I had some editing difficulties from last month and a lot of stuff happened, so I didn't get that video up yet, but so session 6 with section 7 will be uploaded. Believe that was last month's session was session 6, or it could have been session 7, but now I'm losing track of which one we're on, session 7 or session 8, whatever. But what I was about to imply is like the psychological manifestation of effort. I think really has to do with cognitive load balancing. We're really just thinking about load balancing, how we just apply effort moment by moment in our lives, and sometimes we forget that's constantly involving metabolism, and that's like your body using energy. And I think even for a lot of people that, and maybe it's um, more obvious for people who really struggle with nutritional deficiency when they get older, like people who are just not eating right, or especially for the reason why they're not eating right, like whether it's like due to access to clean food and water, or whether they're just stubborn due to nurture dynamics, how they grew up, that they just eat a certain way and it impacts their behavior. And or there's a number of people whose cognitive functioning is not impacted in that fashion until they get older, because around like your later age years, like that's when like the obvious dynamics of metabolism start to show an impact on age, right? Like how, like, consistently are you getting the right sources of nutrition, as opposed to, and especially like exercise, to those like all those basic needs dynamic really become more forthcoming, and like as you get older, as opposed to like when you're in your adolescent years and in your 20s and all that. It's not so obvious, like the choice, like the habitual decisions we make when we're younger has that much of an impact on our psychological outlook and how that manifests. But I think, like, in terms of how we deal with trauma and stress, and like how we're prioritizing things, like I think that's really the big um the big picture is like, are you going through something psychologically? Like, is there trauma, and how is that manifesting? How's it impacting you? Like, how long you've been dealing with it, and what ways have you been dealing with it? Like, I think that's really the root of like of a lot of the struggle. A lot of people that are that maybe they're getting everything else right in their life, but it's that the traumatic experiences that are holding them back, or even the traumatic experiences, like maybe there are limitations in how you deal with them, and you're really trying, and it still holds you back. So like some people, they just have more agency in terms of their physiological limitations, whether or not they have developmental um dysfunctions of sorts. So like whether they're even people who don't have autism, maybe it's psychological, it could still impact their behavior, right? So like and in that sense, masking really isn't just a thing for people with autism to worry about. Even people who are neurotypical, like how you control your demeanor, your disposition in a social setting, and in different dynamics of social settings. So
I
I
feel like
think that matters.
there's so many factors. Um, I feel like there's just so many moving parts to human beings that it's like we try and keep it all together. And I feel like sometimes we don't factor in the part that we're human, and that we're gonna have struggles. And I feel like um
Mm-hmm.
there it's kind of like you have to have a game plan to again bring back that balance, where, like, especially with diet, I've struggled with that, just from, you know it's like a it's not it's like it's not restrictive food intake, but it's like borderline that, to where um sometimes I feel like, oh, I can eat all these varieties of things, and then the next day it makes me want to vomit. And I'm like, oh, great, okay, none of these things are like safe for me. And it's like trying to make sure, that I'm supplementing with something to bridge the gap. But again, it's being aware of that there is a gap that needs to be bridged, and that um I just feel like there's so many. I feel like a lot of neurotypical people don't realize, like, say that I need to take a shower, right? I have to think about the fact that I have to get up. I have to set out my towel. I have to pick out the outfit I'm going to wear after I shower. I have to actually get in the shower. And then it's like I have to do all the bits in the shower. That's washing my hair, then conditioning my hair, then washing my body, and then rinsing. And that's if it's just a regular shower. That's like 15 things. And then a neurotypical person will be like, and I've seen this, they'll just get up, go do the thing, and be fine. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's not how I categorize any of this. I don't know. I feel like there's just so many bits and bobs that, then there's so many pieces to like eating and like having that healthy diet and having your brain work with you. Because even sometimes it is psychological. It's like your brain is just like, not doing it today, dude. And I feel like that can lead to just an overwhelming, just feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah, I think like it's like you gotta keep track of things in a gamification sort of manner. Like you gotta gamify the game, but you don't want to gamify the gamification of the game. Yeah, because like you over worry about, you overcompensate your circumstances. It's kind of like like being a what are those people that become so overly obsessed with their health? Well,
Oh, like
a
not hyper.
hypochondriac. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Something like that. Yeah. Not the stereotype of a hypochondriac, but like I've been there before. I know. I definitely know what it's like to go hypochondriac mode. You just become like very uncertain and insecure about how you're managing your life, and you just kind of go overboard. Like I've definitely been there.
Yeah, and it's very overwhelming, and it already adds to the overwhelm of every day, where there's like,
Mm-hmm.
you have to take care of, like, I feel like people underestimate how exhausting keeping just yourself alive is. I feel like it's underestimated for
Mm-hmm.
anyone who struggles on a day-to-day basis. Just doing basic human
Also,
care.
neurodivergent people are so different than each other. Like, I don't have trouble with that, but I have so much trouble finding friends, finding people with
Yeah.
stuff to in common. I feel like just very isolated because my interests, no one has my problems, which are finding motivation and other things. Finding people to talk to also seem to be very unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Like what I'm looking for, it's like, oh, do you have side projects in programming? No, I don't have side projects. Most people don't. That's what they say. Or like, do you feel like, you have ideas, you want to talk about them, and they're kind of hard to find on Google and so on. They're unique. Most people just don't seem to have that. I ask them, and most people saying, no, not really. It's like it's different. So I guess we also have different sets of problems. I don't really have trouble with that particular issue, but I have my own stuff. If that makes sense. Anyway, go on.
Did you have anything else to share, Taylor?
I I feel like a motto I live by is, all of us are on such a spectrum. Even neurotypical humans are also on a spectrum. So I like to say, you know, just because you've met a neurodivergent person doesn't mean you've met all of them. I think we all constantly live on a spectrum of, we have our own strengths and we have our own weaknesses. And I think if we just take the time to remember that we don't have to figure it all out today. We're allowed to be sad, mad, you know, it's just that we keep trying and we keep trying to achieve our goals. That's a good thing.
And then we have a balance. To keep in mind,
Exactly.
like, how we facilitate that effort. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we just have to remember there's give and take, there's push and pull, equal and opposite reaction for everything. So just take it a day at a time. It doesn't just because you're not meeting that goal of having that niche friend group yet, it doesn't mean that you won't. You you just keep trying. And I like to think that what we focus on is what we find. And if, you're wanting to find friends, it will happen for you. It'll just take time. The same way I want to, better balance my life. I know that it will take time, but eventually I can meet the goals that I have set up for myself.
Right. I agree. Well, I think we've been running for about an hour and a half. So, and I wasn't sure if there was anything else you guys had to share, but I do have other things to do the rest of the night, and I appreciate everybody participating in the dialogue and the session. And for those watching the recording at home, thank you for taking the time to take a look at the recording. But yeah, is there any closing remarks?
I'm just sleepy.
Kevin, anything, any closing remarks before?
Not in particular, just that I think that there, especially online, there's so many choices to make. What community, what platform, etc. And given all the millions of choices to make, it's this huge partition function, huge branching ratio is a term in like strategy games. There's so many moves you can make, like chess on a gigantic board. That I think if you really have a good sense of what is where, you start to see patterns in the information. I think it can be a lot easier to find these really niche interests. It's like Jesse, you could find people who were just really up your alley with the psychiatry, so they could really understand what you're saying when you say it. And then I could find people who are just really programming. So I am optimistic. I think it will take time. It won't be immediate. It won't be automatic. It won't be like undergrad. We just start meeting people. Also, the interests are also in undergrad, the childlike sense of wonder is more common than it is age. So I haven't lost it, but a lot of my undergrad friends who had it, back when we were both undergrad, have lost it as they've gotten older. And I don't think we're going to age in any meaningful amount. I think that'll take a while before we really start feeling the effects of age. I think it's psychological. Being isolated, not having campus, having other stresses that we did not have 10 years ago. And that all can be engineered around with just mindsets and so on. So I feel like we can stay healthy if we understand that the existence of stress in the outside world does not have to create stress internally. That's a tendency, but that's not something that will always happen. It's possible to program a brain in a way that doesn't happen, or you deal with the stress, but you deal with the stress, but you doesn't get to your head, you could say. I guess a lot of people who like driving have done that with driving, and we can do it with non-driving tasks. Honestly, if it was just the stress of driving and it didn't have all the other problems, I probably would drive more. Or I mean, I don't drive at all, but I probably would drive. But I mean, it's got like too many things wrong with it.
Hmm. All right, well, thanks for participating, and until next time, have a nice day, a nice night rather, depending on your time zone and when you're watching this. Take it easy.